Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to Parenting in the 21st Century. I'm Zina Shevchik. Today we'll be discussing the importance of the presence of a father in the healthy development of a child. We have with us Ken Braswell, Assistant Program Manager of the Responsible Fatherhood Initiative within New York State. Thank you, Kenny, for coming today and spending some time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
When I was researching your program, what grabbed my attention right away on your webpage was the subtitle of the Responsible Fatherhood Initiative, which is Strengthening Families Through Stronger Fathers. Tell us about how your program helps to make stronger fathers.
Well, currently we have 6 pilot projects throughout New York State, and that's the New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. In 2006, the New York State Legislature gave us $3 million to start 5 pilot projects in New York State to look at the issue of fatherhood, particularly to look at how do we begin to help families across New York State become more responsible both financially and emotionally. The 5 pilot projects, which are currently in New York City, Syracuse, Buffalo, and in Chautauqua County, currently work with non-custodial parents, because you'll often hear the terminology fatherhood mixed with non-custodial parents, because we do know that 93% of all non-custodial parents are dad. Interestingly enough, within our programs we do have moms as well, because they are non-custodial parents. But these 5 pilot projects, and sometimes you'll hear me say 5 and sometimes I'll say 6, only because we have 5 contractors, but in Buffalo we actually have 2 projects, so sometimes I'll flip back and forth between 5 and 6. But those pilot projects currently focus on employment, education, parenting skills, legal advocacy, mediation, a number of different programs and services that are necessary for primarily fathers who traditionally are not aware of where to go and find services for, can now go to these pilot projects to get assistance in helping them become more responsible fathers, specifically financially, but more importantly emotionally to their children.
What do you think is the major impediment to responsible fatherhood for many men these days?
It is employment. We talk almost exclusively when men come in, particularly around child support, which is the biggest issue. For those who don't know, the mission and goals of the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. We are a temporary assistance agency, primarily responsible for TANF and or welfare, for those who are familiar with that term. Food stamps, HEAP, and child support. We are the agency that's responsible for child support. Many of the barriers, or the primary barrier for men who are trying to adhere to their child support responsibilities, is employment. The ability to be able to pay child support is based on your ability to be employed. And your ability to be employed is based a lot of times on your educational level. And in order to be self-sufficient and sustain your own personal life as well as your kids, you have to be at least have an adequate wage earning job. And for many of our men here in New York State, particularly those of African American and Latino descent, becoming employed is a major issue. So we are, and within our pilot projects as an agency, primarily looking at the issue of employment for many men throughout New York State, because finances becomes almost the issue many times for whether or not a father remains or becomes involved in his children's life, because financial issues are a very important issue for raising our children.
And what specifically do these 5 or 6 pilot projects, how do they address the issue of employment for parents who who have maybe a little bit of lack of education or lack of skills? How do your projects address that issue?
Well, we have to, it's a case management system where we really have to look at an individual and an individual's case to find out what are the barriers that's keeping them from an adequate wage earning job. And in many cases, there are a number of different issues. One of the issues could be inadequate employment. The person had dropped out of high school and doesn't have a GED or a high school diploma, which doesn't allow them to get a job that's going to help them pay their own bills and be financially responsible for their children. One of the other barriers is incarceration. Many of our, particularly African American and Latino males, are being incarcerated and have incarcerated backgrounds, which adds another barrier to becoming employed. Health disparities are keeping men from becoming employed. So there are a number of different issues that are just keeping men from becoming employed, period. And then when they do become employed, they're not employed at levels that allow them to be able to financially sustain their lives and be responsible for their children. So our pilot projects look at all of those aspects. So we look at whether or not an individual has an adequate education, and if not, we try to help them to obtain their GED or higher education or training. We look at whether or not they have an incarcerated background to see if they're an ex-offender and see whether or not there are employers or something that we can do to help them to learn different skills and to be involved in different occupations to stay employed. One of the biggest issues with ex-offenders is recidivism, is keeping them out of trouble once they've come back into the community and not to go back because they're finding frustrations with getting employment, once they're out of prison. Health disparities and mental health, looking at how they feel physically and what their mental makeup is, whether or not there's something going on in their counseling. For many of those. Mediation in terms of being able, particularly when they're fathers, being able to resolve conflict, have conflict resolution, and being able to communicate with the mother of their children and or father of their children if it happens to be a mother in that case. So it really is a case-by-case management, individual management system that all of the pilot projects are engaged in.
How is the connection made between the people who need your help or want your help? How is a connection made between those people and your projects, your pilot project?
2 ways. The first way is a proactive engagement in which the pilot projects have outreach projects where they go out into communities and they expose their services and support to individuals to come in to take part in receiving some of those services and support. And then probably the bigger way is they're almost forced in, where you have individuals who are coming through, at least in the counties in which we have our pilot projects, are coming through the court systems. They're coming through child support, they're coming through family court. They've been given a child support order and the judge says, well, you don't have a job, you better get one soon. And the person says, well, I'm not sure how to get a job, I've had trouble getting a job, and our judge will say, well, there's a pilot site, particularly here in Buffalo or here in New York or here in Syracuse or here in Chautauqua County, that's going to help you get a job, and they're going to help you with all the things that's not allowing you to be able to respond to your child support order. So a lot of it is referrals through child support, and then probably to a lesser extent the imaging of the agency itself, of OTDA, and exposing the Fatherhood initiative overall. So when people find out and they come across some of the events that we may sponsor, that we may have vendor tables, we may be speaking. I speak across the state and across the country about responsible fatherhood. So when I'm in those arenas, people are asking, how can I get help in these areas? And I'll give them telephone numbers, and it'll move that way. And then we also have a website.
And that's what I looked at and I was very impressed with. And what do you think kids need most from their fathers today?
Attention. Financially, you can give a child attention, but they really need to know that their father is there for them no matter what. They need to be able to know that they can pick up the phone and call daddy whenever they need to, however they need to, or whatever they need to call him for. And I think, men, and I speak to men all over the country, with regards to their responsibility and what is it that we believe their children need. And instinctively, men are protectors and providers, and we need to know that we can adequately protect our children and that we can adequately provide for our children. And I think on the flip hand side of that coin, that's how children look at their fathers. They look at their fathers as my provider and my protector. So when that characteristic is not a part of their lives, and they really don't have that individual, that father, to say, wow, this guy is not even around to provide for me, and he's not around to protect me. There's an issue that pops up for a child when that is not there, and unfortunately many of our mothers have to compensate for that. For the lack of, or for absentee fatherism when there's not a man in the home to help balance the parenting responsibilities of both of their children. So I really do think that more than money is time and effort, that children really look for in their fathers. I think that, growing up, I grew up in a single family household. And one of the things that, I didn't have and that I always looked for was that I didn't have that man to show me as a boy, how to be a man, what do I emulate, how do I go out into society and be the man that my mother keeps telling me I'm supposed to be. Be a man, she kept saying, be a man. I'm like, well, I don't know what that means. Mm-hmm. How do I find out what that means? And increasingly in today's society, many of our boys are going out and they're finding out that information in the wrong way. Mm-hmm. So I think it's time and effort. I really do believe that it's time and effort.
It must be difficult for fathers who cannot provide financially to, for many of them to be convinced or to believe that just that their kids need attention even more than, despite the fact that maybe their father can't provide financially for them. Mm-hmm. I suspect that must be quite a barrier as mm-hmm. well to convince fathers that it's important that they be there giving their children attention even if they can't provide what they would like to provide financially. Mm-hmm. I assume that's part of the parenting skills
Absolutely.
That you try to provide.
Even more importantly, sometimes before we can even get to having conversations with them around the relationship with their children, and that is the relationship with the other parent. We sometimes not, we just don't give enough in understanding the importance of the relationship with the other parent, with the custodial parent. And a lot of times when you don't know those things you should be providing, the other parent will give you a sense that, your kids really need to see you more. Your kids really need to have you call them more. They really do need to be with you a little more, particularly when there's boys. And not that girls don't need dads just as much, because they do. But particularly with boys, you need to spend more time with your boys, because your boys need to see you. They need to understand, what it is to be around men. They need to understand how men form friendships. They need to see how responsible men treat other women. They need to see those types of things. So I think that, one of the biggest issues, particularly dealing with the men within our program, is a communication issue. and helping them to understand that the relationship with the custodial parent, with the mother of your children, is just as important as the relationship with your children, and a relationship that you have to maintain just as long. It's a lifelong relationship, and you may not be getting along well now. You may not be able to, you're not together anymore, but this person is a part of your life for the rest of your life. And she's an important and integral piece to your life because she's the person on the other side of the coin that's nurturing and providing for your children. So if for no other importance, that should be important enough for a dad to say, you know, I really need to make sure that my relationship with this person who is raising my child or raising my children is a relationship that's comfortable for me and that's productive for my children. And I think once you begin to pull that relationship together, the relationship with your children becomes that much easier because now at least you're on the same level. You understand the same responsibilities, and more importantly, you have the same goals, you know, which is to make sure that the atmosphere and the environment that your children are growing up in is a successful environment.
If I'm understanding correctly, and I may not be, these pilot projects, are they geared to lower income or disadvantaged family situations, or is it something that's open to any situation, any family that has a non-custodial parent?
It's primarily open to low-income families because low-income families are the families who are struggling the most with financial sufficiency, particularly men. So you're not going to find someone with a skill set who could start a new business or who can get a good job coming into our offices looking for help. Primarily, you're going to see the type of men who are coming in who don't have jobs, who have a underpaying job, who wants to change careers, who are having some issues with trying to find a job because of some of the barriers that are not allowing them to find jobs. So just by the nature of the need of the service, you're going to see more low-income men and women walk into the doors of our pilots than not.
When you said, you mentioned the geographic location of your pilot projects, what is the funding going to be reevaluated at the, I don't know, the end of the pilot projects? Mm-hmm. When is the end of the pilot projects, and you know what's anticipated?
It's a 3-year program. We are at the tail end of our first year currently. The 5 pilot projects were very uniquely picked because what we wanted to do was really look across New York State at all of our demographics and all of our geographics in terms of our very rural areas and our very urban areas. Our 2 pilot projects, which sit in Harlem and in New York, is vastly different from our pilot project in Chautauqua County. Chautauqua County is heavily rural, agricultural, not a lot of industry out there. Transportation and other issues are some of their barriers, even demographically, where in the vast majority of our pilot projects, where many of our clients happen to be of African American descent, in Chautauqua County, the vast majority of them are white. So what we're finding is that the issue of responsible fatherhood doesn't necessarily sit in one population. It is a non-custodial man fatherhood issue. It is not a black issue, it's not a white issue, it's not a Latino issue. It is a father issue. There are some barriers when you begin to look at the different issues across our geographic areas of New York State, but that primary issue of being able to make sure that men can adequately financially respond to their children and emotionally respond to their children are the same. During the 3-year project, we are also engaged in a major evaluation of the project. The Columbia University and Dr. Ron Mincy of Columbia University and the Urban Institute is conducting the evaluation of our projects. And at the end of 2008, October 2008, we're having our first statewide fatherhood conference here in Albany. And as part of that conference, the Urban Institute and Dr. Mincy is going to do a reporting of what they've found in our pilot projects over the last 2 years. So hopefully we'll learn a lot about the work we've been doing here in New York State, the necessity to keep it going, the need for more projects across New York State, how we can do things differently, best practices, measurable outcomes, all of those things that the politicians and the legislatures and philanthropists and all those folks like to hear. They want to hear numbers. They want to hear, let me see the impact of what you're doing. And we have to do that because it does allow us to be able to make sure that these programs last a long time. But on the other side of that, you know, you want to make sure that you're doing good work for people in New York State, that you're helping people. And we are helping a lot of people across New York State. In fact, many of our pilot projects, if not almost all of them, have either closely reached their goals for the year already or exceeded their goals. And they have not even gotten to a year yet, which is really showing demand for the programs across the state. So looking at the evaluation will allow us to be able to look at best practices, to look at garnering additional support from our legislature, from our corporate communities, in terms of helping and assisting us in funding more not-for-profits and faith-based institutions around the state and providing the same services for these men. So there is a large evaluation component to the pilot projects. And then lastly, in which I can't believe I forgot to talk about this, New York State is also the first state in the country that enacted a non-custodial earned income tax credit for non-custodial parents who are making less than $31,000 a year, have paid an equal amount of their child support payment at the end of calendar year '06, and they could receive a tax credit up to $1,025 for doing the right thing, paying your child support, making sure that your payments are on time, and under a income level that will allow you to receive some money to put back in your pocket.
So this is something relatively new, this earned income
Yes.
for credit for a non-custodial parent
Yes,
who
it is.
Lives up to his or her obligations?
Mhm.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's
All
new.
right.
It just started this year.
Okay.
In fact, we received, we just got the numbers the other day, but the average earned income tax credit that was given to individuals was about $400 last year. And I think this past tax year coming around, and I think about 1,400 people, 1,400 to 1,800 people received that earned income tax credit last year.
So we've got to get the word out.
Right. So we have to get the word out. We have to make sure that people are aware that the tax credit is out there. You know, hopefully with an increase in numbers over the next couple of years, with more and more people responding to it, hopefully as an incentive, you know, to make sure that men are adhering to their child support orders by the end of the year, and making sure that the money gets from dads to the children where we ultimately want it to rest.
So that's statewide. That's part of your agency, but that's not part of the pilot projects. This is a law, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's on the books permanently, right?
Yes, it is.
It's not a pilot project.
No, it's not a pilot project.
One of the reasons I asked about the continuation or expansion of these projects was just wondering if it was going to become coming to the Albany area, you know, the Capital District area, these kinds of projects.
Yeah, we are looking. What's going to happen is at the end of the second year, the RFP will be written for the expansion of the
Say what an RFP is.
Request for proposals. It's the grant.
Right.
The grant language will be written for the grant moving into year '09. and that grant will be placed out there into the public, and every not-for-profit institution, faith-based institution around the state can apply for that grant in the '09. Our goal is to really show the shining example of the existing pilot projects so that the pot of money is larger than it is now, so that we can provide these services in more places across New York State. That's our goal, and I think that we are headed in that direction. In terms of what the actual number is going to be in '09, I can only have my hopes and prayers.
Yes, yes. Okay, mine are with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to be doing this particular job, your education, your experience, if you would.
My education is actually not in this social service area. It's in communications area. I owned a newspaper here in Albany, 2 newspapers for almost 12 years. What's Up newspaper and Urban Voices newspaper. Immediately after doing Urban Voices for some time, I worked with the Urban League here in this area and decided that I wanted to start my newspaper again. Got out of that, started Urban Voices, and then when that business wasn't doing that well, decided that I wanted to start a not-for-profit called Fathers Incorporated. And Fathers Incorporated was a not-for-profit that primarily did training and consulting around the country in the area of responsible fatherhood. So what we did is we went around and we did workshops and seminars and planned conferences and those, much of what our pilots are doing now, but we just provided curriculum training, curriculum development in those areas. And last August, my anniversary here at OTDA is next Tuesday, August the 14th. I've been at OTDA for a year. But last summer, around this time, I was doing a workshop at the Empire State Plaza, and then Commissioner of OTDA, Robert Doar, came up to me and introduced himself and said that he had heard about me. He wanted to talk to me about some things. Could I come to his office and talk to him about the Fatherhood Project? And ironically, when I went to go meet with him, I wanted him to match the federal grant that I was applying for the Fatherhood Initiative. And I came into the office and we talked a little bit about that grant and some other things, and just out of the blue, he just said, "You know what, I have something better for you to do. Why don't you come and work for us and run our Fatherhood Initiative?" And in my head at the time, I was like, I want to do my own thing. I'm not trying to be a government man. I just want to, do my own project. And I went back and talked to prevailing heads and calmer spirits, and they said, "Are you nuts? You need to go and do that." And I came back and I said to him, "Are you serious?" And he says, "Yes, I'm very serious." And I said, "Okay, let's try it." And they hired me last year to run the New York State program and to help in the imaging, and it has turned into so much more. I've learned so much in the last year around responsible fatherhood and the movement in New York State. And our current commissioner, David Hansel, who came from HRA in New York City, just came in, with guns blazing in terms of, this is a great project. This is something that we should be involved with. And we've had his support 1,000% since he's walked in the door. And it has actually expanded into so many other opportunities for the agency to provide services for not only fathers, but for families, period. We have relationships and collaborations now with the Office of Children and Family Services. We're looking to do some collaborative projects with the Office of Prevention of Domestic Violence. We're doing projects with corrections and parole and health and education. So all of these areas in which we've been trying for years to try to figure out how to provide services, primarily for fathers and non-custodial parents, are beginning to come together. And the dialogue is allowing us to look at some areas and some places in our population that traditionally we have not looked at, because these are populations that are beginning to pop up out of the services that we're providing for men. And one of those critical areas is the area of African American men between the ages of 16 and 35 years old, particularly in our urban areas, where unemployment for that population is anywhere upwards to 55 to 70%. In our urban areas. 70% of them are also being incarcerated. They're dropping out of school. They're not taking care of their children. So the numbers are extremely devastating for that population. And because this program has begun to work with some of them in providing solutions to get them to be able to be responsible, that population is kind of popping up out of the services that we're providing, which is allowing us to be able to identify other resources and services around the state to be able to tackle that issue. So I'm very proud and very happy about being able to deal with that. And at the same time also being able to recognize the work that mothers have put in to raising our children for so long. The agency has done a good job over the last 15 years in our child support unit. They continue to be and continue to do a good job. We're one of the top performing states with regards to child support in the nation, making sure that money gets to the children that it belongs to. And in our program, we make sure in everything that we do that this is not a program where we're looking to replace the responsibilities of mothers. That's not what this is about. This is purely about strengthening families, because our children need both mothers and their fathers. And it is not about shared time, because that's typically what the argument is about when it comes to parenting. How do we negotiate shared time? It's not about shared time, it's shared responsibility. It's making sure that we are both responsible for the rearing of our children. And typically what happens is when parents break up, there's a negotiation around the time, when the negotiation should not be around the time. The negotiation should be around the roles, because when you split up, time may change, but your role, and even your roles may change, but your responsibility doesn't change. So what you should be working on is, how do I adapt my new role to match my existing responsibility? And if you can begin to come around that, you know, as parents of your children, much of the work that the child support division in our agency has to do, they probably would have a lot less headache if people would start out having that conversation before it ended up in the courtroom with two people battling over something that has absolutely nothing to do with their children.
Well, Mr. Braswell, it's been my privilege to have you here to talk about this initiative.
Thank you.
And we will have on the screen the address of your website.
Okay.
And I just want to mention and hold up something that is on the website. It's called A Driver's Manual for New Dads, a resource guide for taking care of your new baby and your partner, which I think is a fantastic resource, and that's just one example of what's available on the website. And there's much other information there, and contact information, and I'm sure people will be eager to take a look at it.
Thank you.
Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us, Parenting in the 21st Century.